Hello everyone and welcome to Heavy Debriefings. This is Josh Ronquist here, and let's talk about the albums from when I was born from ages 2 to 3 in the year 1991 with my top 10 albums of 1991. A lot of great choices here, and I want to do this quickly because I'm having a horrible time. So let's get right into it with number 10 in Mr. Bungle with their self-titled album, Mr. Bungle. Now, there are a lot of people out there who may not even realize that Mr. Bungle had 3 studio albums, and they were some of the wackiest albums of all time. In fact, there's some people out there who may only know them as a thrash metal band because of the release of the Wrath of the Easter Bunny demo, which came out just a few years ago, despite that being the very first release from Mr. Bungle. Yes, it's very convoluted. But suffice it to say, the self-titled album is the very first release from Mr. Bungle, and it is some of the wackiest music that you can hear. If you think Mike Patton with Faith No More is wacky, you have not heard Mr. Bungle. You have not heard Phantomos. You have not heard him with the Dillinger Escape Plan. And you have not heard him with a lot of other bands. This is completely bonkers, off-the-wall, avant-garde, heavy metal, hard rock, alternative, jazz, fusion, grind, thrash, every genre that you can almost think of, put a whole bunch of terror on top of that and mix it in a blender. And you have Mr. Bungle. I remember picking this album out right before I saw Between the Buried and Me perform Colors in its entirety back in 2007, and where I met one of my good friends for the very first time, Kyle, who I've done many podcasts with. I was a part of his wedding and many other things, so I have a deep attachment to this album. I mean, all you have to do is just look at the album cover and see the sad clown, and you will just understand everything that's going on with this album, despite not even hearing a note of it. If you want something that's completely left of center, if you want something left to the left of center, check out Mr. Bungle's self-titled album. At number 9, we have the sophomore release from Paradise Lost, Gothic. I often confuse that because, Lost Paradise came out first. I always forget about that album, and I did it here again. But yes, Gothic is where the band really started to find their sound. It is a raw album. The tones are gnarly, the production is very, very raw, but the songs are just so good that you can look past all of the production flaws. And despite this being called Gothic, it's not just a Gothic album, it is a death doom album with a lot of Gothic metal tendencies, and it starts going a lot of different other territories as well too. And you can almost kind of hear that the band is going to be going into a much different flavor in a couple albums to come. But of course, it is still deep rooted in that death doom sound with those Gothic overtones. And of course, the title track is one of the most legendary songs in all of Death Doom. So if you want to know where the band really started to pick up and where you really should check them out, of course, again, you should check out Lost Paradise. But I highly recommend checking out Gothic first. Following that is my favorite album from a hair metal band. Though I really don't consider them a hair metal band, I understand the arguments for it. It is the band Skid Row with Slave to the Grind. This is a metal album. It is not a hair metal album, it is just a metal album. Heavy metal. Almost borders on thrash at times as well. And you look at the title track, you hear a great fun song like Monkey Business. It goes, so many bands, especially from that era, they felt like they needed to get more mainstream. They felt like they needed to get more bombastic with their sound. What did Skid Row do? They did the opposite. They went heavier. And this isn't even their heaviest album. Their next album, Revolutions Per Minute, is easily the heaviest album they've done. But to me, Slave to the Grind is the best thing that they've done. Just everything from start to finish about this album is just a great release, and it's just unfortunate it came out when it did, when it was kind of at the tail end of the glam era, so it keeps getting associated with it. This is just a great straight-up metal album, and you should give it a shot. Following that is the sophomore album from Bolt Thrower with War Master. And man, this is the album where Bolt Thrower really figured out who they are and created one of the most seminal albums in all of death metal. Their first album was much more in the grindcore territory. You started hearing blast beats and more of that chaotic sound. With War Master, they really realized what they wanted to become, a more mid-tempo death metal band. On this album, it's like it never gets too fast, you don't hear any blast beats, there's some good double bass going on, but it's nothing that's like completely outrageous. The riffs on this album are just so mid-tempo, slow, heavy sounding, and some of the most intense vocals that you're gonna hear from a UK band. Bull Thrower is one of those bands that the underground knows. And even if you're into death metal, Bull Thrower is one of those bands that you may have heard of but never given a chance. You really should. And I couldn't recommend War Master enough. Following that at number 6 is one of the most underrated thrash metal bands of all time, and I'm glad to see that they are making a comeback and even coming close to my neck of the woods with Milwaukee Metal Fest. Not too close, but close enough where it's like, maybe I will go see them. I haven't decided yet. But it is the band Dark Angel with their seminal album Time Does Not Heal. Yes, every Dark Angel album is amazing in its own right for all the different reasons, but I feel like everything comes together so perfectly with Time Does Not Heal. Start to finish, everything that I'm looking for in a thrash metal album. Of course, the insane drumming and guitar ideas from Gene Hoglan. And everyone that he got to be able to play on this album just created a seminal thrash masterpiece that not enough people know about. If you're in the thrash realms, you know all about this album, and you appreciate it as much as I do. And I henceforth tell you to go tell everyone you know to go check out Dark Angel. And that's why I'm telling you, if you haven't heard of them before, to check out Dark Angel. No, it is not just a failed Fox show. It is one of the greatest thrash bands to exist. And seriously, I can't say enough good things about Dark Angel's Time Does Not Heal. At number 5 is the first appearance of one of my all-time musical heroes, Dan Swano, with his band Edge of Sanity and their debut album Nothing But Death Remains. Now, this is a great starting point for the band as well. You can understand what the band wanted to try to attempt, and it has that great Swedish death metal sound that I love so very much. But you can also tell it's young, it's raw, and the band is still trying to figure out who they are. And on later albums, you understand that they become the real godfathers of progressive death metal. Sorry, Opeth, Edge of Sanity beat you by just a couple years. And it's funny because Dan Swano helped Michael Ankerfeld with the first couple Opeth albums, and they were together in Bloodbath and all of these other things, but that's all stuff for another time. On this album, it is just a great old school Swedish death metal album, and not one that gets talked about in the realms of what came out around that time. You got your Left Hand Path, you got Grave, you got all these great bands. But Edge of Sanity, it gets more known later. But I highly recommend that people check out the debut album, Nothing But Death Remains, because it is just that good. At number 4, we continue on with some progressive metal from Fate's Warning and my second favorite Fate's Warning album, Parallels. This is the album that probably has the most mainstream appeal to it. There are songs on here that did get some music videos behind it, like I don't watch VH1 Classic, but I know at one point in time there were songs off of this album that appeared on VH1 Classic, which is pretty cool to see. And of course, I imagine well before my small town had MTV, I imagine Fate's Warning was on Headbangers Ball as well too, with some Fate's Warning songs. But this album has that great, perfect balance of heavy metal and prog mixed together with some great pop sensibilities, some of the finest work of Ray Alder, and just a perfect, seminal, progressive metal album. While not my favorite, and I probably will do a backwards marathon of Fate's Warning pretty soon, it is one of the best Fate's Warning albums. And if you've never checked them out and you are a fan of bands like Queensryche and Dream Theater, if you like some bands like Maiden or Judas Priest, or if you've just always heard the name and you just want to see what all the hubbub is about, I recommend you check out Fate's Warning, and Yeah, I'll even say you should check out the album Parallels. Number 3 is the progressive death metal, technical death metal masterpiece from Atheist, and easily their best album, Unquestionable Presence. Now, there is an argument to be made for all 4 albums. Peace of Mind, Unquestionable Presence, Elements, and Jupiter are fantastic albums, all 4 of them. But one has to stand out on top, and easily for me, it's Atheist, doing their sophomore album with Unquestionable Presence. It's the perfect element of technical death metal, progressive death metal, and just the right amount of jazz. And of course, one of the most underrated drummers in all of death metal, Steve Flynn, does some of the most absolutely jaw-dropping, insane drum patterns, drum fills, and drum beats that you're going to hear on any album of this time or in any era. It's not just constant blast beats and double bass. It is insane, sick, jazz drumming over tech metal. And of course, everyone in the band just rules. And while there were some trials and tribulations that got to this album, of course, lineup changed due to unfortunate circumstances, this album is just the shining example of what bands wanted to be able to achieve. This came out around the time of Death. This came out before Cynic. Atheist is the most underrated of all of those bands of that era, and you need to check them out. And if you had to start off anywhere, I can't say it enough. Check out Unquestionable Presence. Coming in at number 2 is With Every Passing Year, a band that means more and more to me, and I hold them in such high regard. It is the band Metal Church, is one of my 2 favorite Metal Church albums, The Human Factor. While this is one of the lesser favorites, although still held in high regard for the top era of Metal Church, there are some songs on here that just hit me so very hard. They are that perfect combination of heavy metal, new wave of British heavy metal, thrash metal, and just the right amount of prog, where you kind of question if they even are a prog band. And the answer is, potentially. But seriously, everything from Steve Howe's amazing vocals, to the guitar playing, the bass, the drums, everything on this album, the production just feels so pristine for what they were going for. And of course, just the overall vibe of the entire album. And when they write a song like In Harm's Way, which hits me way too hard and is way too relatable to what's happened in my life, yeah, this is fantastic stuff. And it is such a shame that Mike Howe is no longer with us, but, with that said, Metal Church is going back strong now with Mark Lopez of Ross the Boss and Let Us Pray going to be taking over the helm for the frontman spot of Metal Church, and I am so excited to see where the band goes from here. Whether they release an album this year or in 2024, whatever ends up happening. All I know is I'll be here chomping at the bit. But until then, go check out The Human Factor. It is a very underrated album, but one you should check out. And now coming in at number 1, my favorite album in 1991 is from Armored Saint. Yes, it is not the Black Album. It is Armored Saint with Symbol of Salvation. And yeah, I don't know what I can really say about this album that hasn't been covered elsewhere, but this is the quintessential mix of heavy metal, new wave of British heavy metal, and yeah, I'll say it, glam and hair metal. While they were never a band like Poison, they were closer to like Dokken, and that's not a bad thing, because they wrote amazing riffs, catchy songs, and John Bush is one of my favorite vocalists of all time. And you'll be seeing later in these lists how I hold John Bush in high regard to not only Armored Saint, but another band that he's been in. In fact, I'll even say John Bush is a better singer than another singer that he filled in for many, many years. But yes, Symbol of Salvation is one of those albums that just, it has perfect pop sensibilities, great hard rock heavy metal moments, soaring vocals, and some of the best songwriting you're going to see in 1991. And I can't say enough good things about it. You just need to listen to it for yourself. So yeah, my favorite album of 1991, Armored Saint, Symbol of Salvation. And there we go, my top 10 albums of 1991. If you would like to tell me why you enjoy these albums, if you made any discoveries from these lists, or why you're so mad at me for not putting on the Black Album, tell me in the comments below. And of course, if you like these lists, if you like anything that I do, like, comment, share, subscribe, and do all of those things to be able to get me more of a reach on YouTube so I can reach the masses and you can actually see when I post videos and you just don't happen to stumble across them. And until next week when I cover the top 10 albums of 1992, or my next interview, my next review, my next top 10 list, or anything else I decide to put up on here. For Heavy Debriefings, this is Josh Runquist saying, see ya.